everybody, and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and the day has finally come. I will be doing my top 10 favorite roller coaster list right now. So if you didn't know, I had this thing called Listmas last holiday season, and it never ended up being completed. This list was actually going to be a top 12, and it was going to be my final list right when originally Christmas Eve hit, and then after that it ended up being pushed back to New Year's, and then it just never ended up happening because so many other videos just became more and more important. But I'm kind of glad I didn't end up finishing those lists because I've gotten more and more time to think about it, as well as I got to ride a couple more coasters within those past 6-7 months now, and I really got to solidify my opinions and even add on a coaster or two to my list, as well as take some of them off after a couple re-rides that I've had in the past year. So I'm actually kind of grateful that I was able to do this, because my opinion has changed quite greatly, at least with the lower half of my top 10. But before we actually get to the top 10 list, I want to talk about some honorable mentions that I have to have on here, and those include X2, which just missed the list, and that reason is just because it's such a hit or miss ride for me most of the time. Sometimes it could potentially be my number one coaster, but sometimes it could be in my bottom 50. So it's really just such a hit and miss ride. I really don't know how to rate it properly, but I have consistently been getting more and more comfortable rides as of the past couple months, so hopefully it will end up in my top 10 eventually. But as of right now, I just don't feel comfortable putting it in my top 10 because I've had some really atrocious rides on it. And it's also so bipolar that I can't really find a true number for it. And my second honorable mention has to go to Scandia Screamer, which sadly has not found a new home after Scandia Ontario has been torn down. And hopefully it'll find a new home soon. But this ride is just missing the top 10. It was so unbelievably fun. There is a review that will be coming out very soon on it, so I will link it when that review is up. But it legitimately was one of the most fun but ridiculous coasters I've ever ridden, and that's just to put it in short. But now let's move on to my top 10 roller coaster list, and this includes both steel and wooden coasters because I haven't even ridden enough wooden coasters to have more than 10 of them on a list. I think I've only ridden 6 wooden coasters in total. So hopefully I'll be able to, this time next year, make a top 10 wooden coasters list, hopefully. But we'll just have to wait and see for that. I don't know how many credits I'll get done with in the next year. But speaking of credits, I'm going to get another 16 or so more within this next month when I go to Cedar Point. And that's really the only reason that I'm putting this list out now instead of maybe in December, because I figure that Cedar Point will end up wrecking my top 10 with putting a good 3 or 4 coasters from that park in my list, but we'll just have to wait and see. But let's finally get on to my top 10, and at number 10, I have Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, the RMC hybrid coaster that really is the star attraction of the park itself. And this replaced Roar back in 2015. And I would argue it is the best coaster for hang time in the entire state of California, as well as pretty much the West Coast in general. Now, you could definitely argue that rides like Full Throttle and even Cannibal have some amazing hang time, but Joker has 3 separate elements that are just focused on the hang time. But in addition to that, it has quite the interesting layout with lots of curves and some nice pops of airtime that really make it a lot of fun and super enjoyable. And this is why it's at my number 10. Now, my number 9, we're going to move down south to Southern California to Knott's Berry Farm, where Accelerator resides, and this is the fastest accelerated launch I have ever experienced for sure. It's 82 miles an hour in 2.3 seconds, which is absolutely insane. It is a hydraulic launch coaster by the company Intamin, and there really is nothing like this launch that I've experienced. The only thing that I could really relate it to for people in the Midwest would be Max Force, or potentially on the East Coast if you got on Hypersonic XLC back in the day. It's kind of that style of acceleration. But Accelerator was the first model of the Accelerator model that would soon go on to make Top Thrill Dragster as well as King to Ka the 2 tallest coasters in the world. And Accelerator definitely is just a tester model for it, but I would argue is super forceful and has some really interesting elements in its shorter top hat, as well as its 2 overbank turns that I sometimes gray out and even black out on. But Accelerator is definitely a great standout ride, and you definitely have to check it out if you're at Knott's Berry Farm. Now, on to my number 8. This actually has dropped in my rankings over the past year and a half, and this is Gold Striker at California's Great America. So we're heading back up to Northern California now for the GCI that resides at the front of the park of California's Great America. And this wooden coaster, honestly, is one of the most intense experiences I've had, at least layout-wise. The layout for this ride is insane. It's twisting and turning and hopping and moving all about in such a way that makes you feel like you're being thrown around like a rag doll, but in the best way possible. It really is an exciting adventure. Now, the only reason it's really dropped in my rankings so much is because I've been on so many great rides in the past year and a half, but as well as it has started to get a little rougher. But you definitely cannot miss out on a night ride on this. And the first drop is amazing, as well as its first ejector airtime hill. And this used to be my first favorite ride in the park, but as of right now, it has dropped one space. But we'll get to that ride a little later on in this list. But as of right now, let's head to my number 7. In this spot, I have Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain, the graceful B&M flying coaster, which is honestly remarkable in so many ways. I just love how graceful this ride is overall, as well as the giant pretzel loop being one of the most forceful elements I've ever experienced. And the views you get on this ride are just unmatched. It is amazing, all the sights and sounds you can experience on Tatsu from just Six Flags Magic Mountain, as well as in the surrounding areas. But it legitimately feels like you are flying at times, and that will never get old in my mind. Now, moving on to my number 6, this is moving all the way to Salt Lake City, or at least near it, in Farmington, Utah, and this is Cannibal at Lagoon. Cannibal is an in-house built coaster, and as of right now, is the steepest operating roller coaster in all of North America, with a drop of 116 degrees. Yeah, you heard that right. Over 20 degrees farther than straight down. This ride has some of the best elements I've ever experienced on a roller coaster, as well as it being super smooth. But that first drop being that steep is just unlike anything I've experienced, as well as the final inversions being the Lagoon Roll gives some of the best hang time I think I will ever experience. It is fantastic in every way. And I really hope I can go get to ride this ride more. I only got 4 rides on it with my 1 visit to Lagoon. But it really is an awesome ride and made my trip pretty much worth it. Now, moving on to my number 5, we're coming close to my home, and that is back to Knott's Berry Farm for Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider is a beast, especially at nighttime, so definitely make sure to check it out at night. But Ghost Rider, although the layout looks quite tame, is just the opposite. The airtime is incredible, ejector and floater alike. It's also got a forceful layout, tons of laterals. This is the star attraction in my mind at Knott's Berry Farm, and is easily my favorite wooden coaster. The action just keeps coming on this ride, and going through the giant wooden structure just adds to it. But Ghost Rider is my number 5, so we've only got 4 more rides to go. And speaking of 4 more, number 4 is coming up, and that is Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. Yep, we're jumping all the way near San Antonio now. For the first Raptor model from RMC that I ever got to ride, and I got to ride it opening day, which was a lot of fun. But this ride is ridiculously intense, as well as open, because this ride only has 1 person per row. You get an amazing open feeling where you can reach out and not have to worry about hitting anybody else. But with it being as free and graceful as it looks, it is super intense. I've grayed out every time I've ridden this ride, and it has some of the most amazing ejector airtime I've ever experienced. And speaking of ejector airtime, we've got another moment that is from the same model and make, but over in Northern California, California's Great America, and this is Railblazer. Railblazer is my favorite of the 2 Raptor clones, but not by too much. There's just something about it that I like a little more. It feels a little more relentless, especially with its amazing off-axis airtime hill, but both of these rides are incredible. And I would just like to mention that my top 5, even all the way to my top 6 and 7, could potentially be switched around depending on what I've ridden last, because there have been sometimes I've come off of Tatsu and been like, oh man, that could really be my number 2 or my number 1, but then I think about it for a week or so and I'm like, no, you know, I prefer this or this. And that goes the same with like Ghost Rider and Railblazer and even Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster. All of these rides are amazing, so don't be too upset by the ranking of these rides. But getting back to the ranking, we are at my number 2, and this may come as a surprise to some of you guys, but I've finally figured it out. My number 2, heading back down to Southern California at Six Flags Magic Mountain, is Twisted Colossus. Now, this RMC hybrid coaster was the longest of its kind before Steel Vengeance was made. And the cool thing about this is it is a quasi Mobius loop coaster, meaning you go around the same type of layout twice, but you can potentially race the other train that will follow you behind or the train in front of you, and it really adds for some cool elements. Now, my only reason for putting this in number 2 is because I rarely get duels on this ride. Otherwise, I would potentially put it at number 1 because the dueling just adds so much to the ride itself. But this has some of the most amazing ejector airtime I've ever experienced, as well as just airtime in general, and it has a great inversion in the Top Gun stall. But this ride is pretty non-stop when you're going throughout the course, and it's even exciting when you're trying to root for the other train to catch up to you going up the second lift hill. So it just is a super long ride that packs a heck of a punch, and I really enjoy it so incredibly much. This was my number 1 for a very, very long time. But speaking of number 1s, we gotta finally move to it, and we're jumping all the way back to Six Flags Fiesta Texas for Iron Rattler. This is an RMC iBox hybrid that was built in 2013 and was the first steel coaster by RMC to feature an inversion. Now, this ride has blown me away in the good 8 or 9 times I've ridden it. The first drop is probably my favorite drop on any coaster. It is so ridiculously good with its little twisting turns as well as amazing ejector airtime. And this ride is just a combination of all of my favorite rides' best elements, I would say. And that includes an amazing first drop with ejector and also twisting airtime at that, as well as some nice head choppers into nice floater and graceful elements, as well as a solid lateral inversion. And what I mean by that is the 0G roll has some amazing laterals if you're in the right seat. And then after that, some compact twistiness, as well as some nice ejector airtime, and then more of that graceful speed with some head choppers and hand choppers. It is really just a combination of all my favorite elements, I would say. And for that reason, Iron Rattler is definitely my favorite coaster, at least at the moment, until I go to Cedar Point. We'll see if it gets dethroned, but we'll just have to wait until the end of August to see if that's the case. Now, I know you guys have been waiting for this video forever. I've gotten so many questions about it, probably once a week. When's your top 10 coming out? So I'm glad I can finally get it out to you guys. And make sure to comment down your top 10 below, because I'd love to see what your guys' opinions are and where you have visited as well as where you're from, to get a better idea on your guys' tastes and what you guys prefer. But I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you have not. We're going to have tons of content in the next coming months about Cedar Point, as well as tons of parks in Southern California mainly. But until next time, we'll see you on the next ride.